Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, episode 15. I am your show's host, Kyle, and I think I got a pretty good show put together for everyone today, so I hope you all enjoy it. If you are enjoying the show, think about going to iTunes and leaving me a rating and review there. It will help the show to get out to more people. I'll have to give that a check and see if I've gotten any more ratings and reviews. I have a couple good ratings and reviews on there, and I like to see that. And I think if anybody's kind of looking for a foreign policy show to check out, the more good ratings and reviews we have, the better and easier it will be for people to click on it. So think about doing that. And while you're there, you might as well subscribe to the show. That way you never miss an episode of this really cool podcast. I hope you're all liking it. Again, any feedback or suggestions, feel free to either join the Facebook group and post them on there or send me an email. Best place to do that is kylesfilesblog.com at gmail.com. kylesfilesblog@gmail.com, or you could just go to my website and find it there, kylesfilesblog.com. Alright everybody, I guess we could just go ahead and get into the news. Gonna start with a couple stories dealing with John McCain. Yes, kooky old John McCain is still kicking in the Senate. Man, he has been there for a long time. He has voted for a lot of war, and he has really done a lot to try to destroy the great country of America in his time there. He's voted for so many different wars that have killed so many lives and taken the lives of so many Americans. It buried the American people in piles and piles of debt. All the debt that are now on the shoulders of, the millennial generation, thanks to John McCain voting for all these wars. And we're no safer today than we were then. And of course, we don't have very many freedoms because John McCain started all these wars and upset all these people. And now we have to sacrifice our freedoms because he wanted to collect checks from Boeing and, Raytheon and Lockheed. And he seems to just be somebody who likes war in general. So, on the Senate floor, John McCain was introducing I don't know if it was a bill or a resolution that would have approved on the U.S. side adding Montenegro to NATO. And during his little introduction of this bill, he said that a certain senator from Kentucky, probably the best senator we have right now, Rand Paul, may object to this. And in the first part of it, he indicated that Rand Paul may have some sympathies for the Russian government, and that's why he would want to object to such a measure to add Montenegro to NATO. Rand Paul ended up objecting to the motion to pass the resolution that would have added Montenegro to NATO. After that, John McCain said the senator from Kentucky is now working for Putin. And wow, what a thing to say on the Senate floor for John McCain to just flat out say that he thinks Rand Paul is working for Putin because Rand Paul opposes Montenegro being a part of the NATO alliance. And not that Rand Paul wants Montenegro to be a part of Russia. He never made a claim like that. Just that Rand Paul doesn't think Montenegro should be in NATO. So this seems to me to be a pretty obvious violation of the same rule that Senator Elizabeth Warren violated by disparaging the name of Jeff Sessions on the Senate floor, accusing Rand Paul of essentially committing treason and putting the priorities of Russia over the priorities of the United States, and Rand Paul being a stooge of the Russian government. Wow, that's a pretty big claim to make without any proof or anything like that. Maybe we will see John McCain get a little slap on the wrist from the Senate. I doubt it, but I think that's something that Rand Paul should kind of push for just to bring more attention to this, because John McCain looked pretty kooky and stupid saying this. Rand Paul, of course, fired back and said that the Montenegro military is only about 2,000 strong. It's a tiny little country, so there's really no advantage to having them in NATO for the United States. I don't see why the United States would want to add the country to NATO for any other reason than to expand the borders of NATO and maybe upset Russia a little bit more by adding Montenegro in. The real disadvantage of this is that if Montenegro is added to NATO, then if Montenegro is attacked by another country, then the United States is bound by treaty to respond to that attack. So whether it's Russia or any other country attacks Montenegro, now the United States has to send our troops to go fight and die for Montenegro. And Montenegro will, even if the U.S. is attacked and Montenegro sends its entire army of 2,000 people and 8 armored personnel carriers to help the United States, what is that? It doesn't help us in any way at all. And so at some point, I think we need to look at this NATO alliance and say, is it worth it? Is this country worth it for American troops to go fight and die? Can you find Montenegro on a map? I doubt most Americans can. I think we really need to evaluate this for many, many NATO countries, not just Montenegro. I mean, if it were up to John McCain, we would have already had Ukraine and Georgia, not the state, the country located kind of south of Russia, within NATO. And if we do have these countries within NATO, it could very easily provoke a war between the U.S. and Russia. And this is, if we have this war, thousands and thousands of American troops are going to die, if not in the tens of thousands, or, who knows? With countries that are nuclear superpowers like the United States and Russia, I mean, we could be looking in the death tolls in the millions and millions of people. Nuclear war isn't impossible between these two nations. And so, I guess John McCain, being an old man, only having a couple of years left himself and not really caring about anybody else, may think, well, it'd be fun to see the world go out in a giant blaze of nuclear fallout or something. But for the rest of us that have long lives ahead of us, please shut up, John McCain, and stop trying to kill me. There's no strategic value here. It's all about, pandering to the military industrial complex so John McCain could keep getting reelected. He could keep padding his checks and his campaign funds with big donations from Lockheed and Raytheon and Boeing and all the other weapons companies. And I'm sure for him it's just fun to see all these wars in places and have so much going on. I guess when you're in the Senate for so long and you voted on so many wars, it takes a little bit more than just a silly old Middle Eastern war to really get you excited. You need some big international conflicts on a worldwide stage to really get you going. So maybe that's it. Another thing introduced, we have a resolution introduced by kooky old John McCain as well on Syria. I believe the resolution was introduced on Wednesday, which was the 6th anniversary of the civil war in Syria. And that resolution basically said that we are condemning Syria and Russia for their actions in Syria. This is a case where we have John McCain advocating for condemning Syria and Russia for killing civilians in Syria when the U.S. is killing civilians in Syria. And, I guess I want to be the first to say that what the Syrian government and the Russian government are doing in Syria is horrendous, and they really should be more careful where they're bombing. Probably should stop most of the bombing campaigns. I guess where you have Assad wanting to beat back the terrorists and ISIS, maybe he has some justification for carrying out some of the bombings that he does, but most of the barrel bombings and hitting civilian targets intentionally, or at least not caring when he hits civilian targets, is disgusting, and Assad's not a good guy. However, the U.S. is also doing this. Just last night or today, we have the U.S. using a Reaper drone hitting a mosque during evening prayer and killing, I've seen numbers, near 50 people died in total, including at least 33 civilians. It seems like the Reaper drone, one or two of them unloaded a full arsenal or a full payload of Hellfire missiles on the mosque. If John McCain wants the civilians of Syria to stop dying, he should look first at the U.S. policy in Syria and say, well, maybe, those in glass houses shouldn't throw rocks. And John McCain, you got a really big glass house with all the wars you voted for, and should probably stop throwing rocks at Russia and Syria at this point. And I guess we have to wonder, does John McCain realize his own hypocrisy, or is he Does he think that every bomb the U.S. drops is a freedom bomb of absolute morality and just a really good thing? Or does he actually understand, or does he just ignore the fact that the U.S. actually kills civilians, and unfortunately that's something that's going to happen? So I guess we'll never know what's going on inside John McCain's head, but it's really shameful for him, of all people, to try to condemn the actions of other governments bombing people. So I think that wraps up for my discussion on kooky old John McCain today. Unfortunately, he was just reelected for another 6-year term. Maybe this will be his last and we can finally get rid of the old man who's been cast, about every vote he's ever cast has been terrible. I think the only decent position he has on torture is on torture, and that's because he was tortured himself and has at least the decency to empathize with people being tortured. However, anything else, you could pretty much count on John McCain to be voting the wrong way, to be terrible on it, to be sending more U.S. military members to go fight and die in needless war, right? I mean, at some point you would think he would realize that what he's doing is not protecting U.S. troops. He's sending them to die for no reason. What more terrible thing to do to our men and women in uniform than to send them to go die in a war solely so he could collect another check from Lockheed Martin. Awful. All right, moving on to talk about Donald Trump. Trump's asking for the Congress to pass an extra $300 billion in immediate funding for the Pentagon because the $600 and something billion that the Pentagon got this past year apparently is not enough for Donald Trump. $5 billion of that money would go to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria. I guess at least part of this money would be for the additional troops being sent to Syria. It seems like a pretty terrible move to go spend more money on ISIS. That's gonna be defeated anyways. If you want to know my kind of position on ISIS in Syria, you should check out my show from Wednesday where I really outlined how the U.S. could leave Syria and ISIS is going to be defeated anyway, so why spend more U.S. money in Syria when we could let the Russians spend their money in Syria, weaken the Russian Empire and help the U.S. Economy and citizens spend less money. He also wants $1.1 billion for more war in Afghanistan. It didn't say what this money was for in Afghanistan. I know we don't have much indication on what Trump's policy is going to be in Afghanistan, but it seems to me that this is an indication that we should expect that he is going to maybe not carry out an Obama-like surge of 30,000 troops in Syria, but we could see more U.S. intervention there. The Taliban has taken nearly 50% of the country now, so we're really at a point where if the U.S. wants to continue to pretend like it won the war in Afghanistan, then it's going to have to send in a lot more troops, or else the Taliban are really going to take the country over. Also, as I've detailed, ISIS is expanding in Afghanistan, so we're really looking at a pretty nasty situation there. The rest of the $30 billion would be to, quote, rebuild the military, whatever that means. We have like coming 12 aircraft carriers here. We got hundreds of at least 100 F-35s now. We have a massive military. If we stop wasting money in all these needless wars and dropping bombs everywhere, then we're not going to need to spend all this money on all these programs. You know, we don't need to rebuild the military if we're not wasting so much stuff blowing up innocent civilians in Syria, or, you know, waging endless wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that have achieved nothing. Is Iraq, you know, is the status of Iraq today better or worse for the U.S. than the status of Iraq was when Saddam Hussein was in charge? And you have to say worse because you have a couple 10,000 jihadists running around in the country and carrying out suicide bombings anywhere. And you would certainly have to say just about the same thing for Afghanistan. And also, if Donald Trump really wants to spend extra money rebuilding the military, maybe he would look at cutting military waste before asking for more money out of our pockets. We have a U.S. general saying that the U.S. used a $3 million Patriot missile to shoot down a quadcopter drone. Now, these quadcopter drones are the ones that you could go and buy at, maybe not Walmart, but at a, decently priced Hobby Lobby type shop. I believe a journalist found the one that was likely used on Amazon for $200. So, man, if you want to know that the terrorists, this is what they want. They want to bankrupt the American empire. And is there any way better to bankrupt the American empire and really to show how stupid and foolish our terror war is than to see that the U.S. is using that $3 million missile on a $200 drone? At that ratio, we would be bankrupt long before the terrorists ever were, and they would just laugh all the way along, and they'd be, they'd be willing to sacrifice hundreds and hundreds of $200 drones if the U.S. is going to use Patriot missiles on all of them. Really unbelievably stupid, wasteful. And these are the places that if Donald Trump really wants to improve the military, that he should look. All right, now I want to talk about a few stories coming out of Syria. We had a suicide bombing in Damascus on the 6th anniversary of the Syrian civil war there. I mean, the situation in Syria is just awful and nasty. 6 years of the civil war. What a terrible place to have to live. You got to feel for all the civilians who really never get a break if it isn't Assad dropping barrel bombs on somebody, or Russia indiscriminately bombing a hospital, the U.S. bombing a mosque, or Al-Qaeda, ISIS-style people going and blowing themselves up outside a court building. I mean, where can you even consider yourself safe at this point? There's nowhere. And somebody had commented on one of my previous episodes saying that, why don't these people, fight for their freedoms like the Americans did in the Revolutionary War? And a lot of that is because all the weapons the U.S. has poured into the conflict, that if you're fighting to overthrow Assad, the only people, the people that are equipped to do that are really the terrorists that took the weapons from the groups that the U.S. gave when we gave them weapons. They have tow missiles and pretty heavy small arms, where if you're just a couple of average citizens in civilian, you may be able to scrape together a couple of AK-47s and stuff, but if you're going to fight to overthrow the Assad government, you're not going to get a better government than Assad to take place, because then that strongest group is Al-Qaeda. And so you would have to fight several wars in the country, and with you being the least funded and not having any type of real combat training, these ISIS guys fought against the U.S. and Iraq, they fought Gaddafi in Libya, and then now they're fighting in Syria. They fought several wars, and they're trained and they're ready to go, and people just picking up weapons don't have much of a chance. So it's an ugly situation. We have a story saying that the U.S. may deploy up to 1,000 more troops to Syria. This is in addition to the Marines that are recently stationed there. This would about double the number of U.S. troops in Syria. And this seems like, is Trump looking to invade Syria? Are we looking for a proxy war with Russia there? Why is he pouring in all these troops? Obviously, ISIS is going to fall. The Kurds are on one side, the Syrians and Russians are on the other. To the other side, you have Shia militias in Iraq really making progress. And so ISIS, especially in Syria, they're surrounded and they're going down. And the additional U.S. troops, I'm confused as who they're there to fight. It seems like the most likely target at this point has to be the Assad government, unless Trump plans on using those troops to fight some of the maybe terrorists, and like the Al-Qaeda type terrorists that Obama ended up arming. So very, very confusing as to what the strategy there could possibly be. But again, we don't need to put our men and women in harm's way in Syria. Absolutely stupid. We also have Israel carrying out bombings in Palmyra, Syria. They hit Syrian army targets there. This story is pretty new, so there's some conflicting reports. Syria did fire anti-aircraft weapon at the Israeli jets. Apparently there were 4 Israeli jets in Syria carrying out these strikes. We have reports from the Syrian government saying that they did shoot down one of the Israeli jets. We have reports from the Israeli government saying that a jet did not get shot down, but a Israeli missile hit one of the Syrian anti-aircraft missiles. So who knows, maybe we'll get the truth one day, maybe we won't. But I think the significant part of the story is that Israel seems to be getting a little bit more brazen in attacking the Assad government. Attacking Assad in Palmyra, I mean, the main group fighting that would be able to fight against Assad in Palmyra would be ISIS. So essentially what Israeli did by carrying out these airstrikes has helped ISIS. And then we also have a story from Syria that the Assad government asked the UN to ask the U.S. coalition to stop bombing around Syrian dams. I guess with the 6 years of civil war, the structural integrity of these dams is starting to be compromised. And when you're dropping these big bombs, next to the dams, you are recording some seismic activity, and eventually dropping bombs close enough to dams, even if you're not hitting the dams themselves, is going to cause the dam to break. And, hundreds of thousands of people could die if some of these dams break, especially the ones on the Euphrates River. I mean, this is a big river that could certainly take out a lot of people with the flooding that could occur from it. All right, we're going to move on to Yemen now. Just want to reiterate again, I know I've covered this a little bit in the past, but the Yemen war is unwinnable for the U.S. The 2 biggest fighting forces in the Yemen war are like the Al-Qaeda ISIS alliance and the Houthis, and the U.S. is bombing both of those sides. It's interesting in what the U.S. could possibly see as their desirable outcome in Yemen. Hadi, the president that Saudi Arabia bats, and that the U.S. at least bats from that perspective as we're backing Saudi Arabia's war there, will never take the throne again. He lacks popular support. He lacks really any support. There's some people who don't like the Houthis who support that's government side kind of by default. But it seems clear that he would never be able to establish enough power, at least in the north of the country, to ever retake the capital, Asana. The U.S. is actively assisting Saudi Arabia in bombing and starving North Yemen and the Houthis there, and we're also actively bombing Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and it's a situation where you really have to try to, the U.S. should have a clear goal, like this is what we want the outcome in Yemen to be, and there doesn't seem to be one that's at all feasible. So why are we bombing there? Why are we supporting the Saudi campaign? The UN came out with a recent report saying that 60% of the people in Yemen were starving, that 17 million people in Yemen that are either in crisis food situation or emergency food situation. That means these people don't have enough food to eat right now. Some of them are actively starving to death, and I'm assuming dying on the streets, probably trying to beg for a little crumb of bread or something. There's pictures of people getting so desperate that they're going and picking through landfills just looking for any little amount of food that they could eat. And this is what the U.S. is supporting in Yemen. This is Saudi Arabia's blockade taking effect. Even when food aid is able to kind of get to Yemen, Saudi Arabia often will direct the aid to have to go through the south of the country, and who knows if it ever makes it to the people starving in the north. Also, whenever these ships are carrying food expires, and so you have to wonder if some of the food's being expired as Saudi sends these food aid ships through a bunch of red tape and from one port to another. They're also destroying the ports and the cranes at the ports, and so it's very hard to offload the cargo even if you get it there. And once again, this is what our government is supporting in Yemen. They're supporting the starving of a population, and to what end is completely unknown. A few updates on what's happening in Libya. There's a lot of fighting around the Benghazi area for oil fields. On one side, we have General Haftar, who was a former kind of CIA stooge that tried to run a coup on Gaddafi years back and then ended up living in the U.S. outside of Langley, Virginia for a while. Eventually, after Gaddafi was killed, he went back to Libya to try to, I guess, retake the throne there. There's so many different groups in Libya, it's really hard to understand the conflict, but you have him fighting Islamic militias from around the city of Benghazi. And then you also have like the Liberty Unity government, which is the UN-backed government, and they are kind of in the west of the country. The Benghazi's in the east, and all this fighting is going on in the east. News stories coming out of North Korea. Both Rex Tillerson and Nikki Haley made statements this past week that said pretty much that the U.S. wasn't going to talk to North Korea and that the U.S. wasn't really looking to work out a diplomatic solution with North Korea. They did say that, China or Russia could put some pressure on North Korea to try to get them to fall in line and give up their nuclear and missile programs. However, the U.S. isn't going to try. Nikki Haley and Rex Tillerson, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson are diplomats. Their job is diplomacy. Their job is to go talk to countries and try to avoid war. The fact that these people don't want to talk to North Korea means that they're not doing their jobs. And if they're not doing their jobs, stop collecting paychecks from us and go do something else. I find it absolutely unbelievable and ridiculous that the UN ambassador to the U.S. ambassador to the UN isn't going to talk to another country's envoy at the UN when there's diplomatic hostilities between the two countries. Now, it could be determined at the presidential level that these talks aren't working, but it should be Nikki Haley advocating for more talks because her job is to talk to other countries. And it's not like she's had this position for that long. As she talked to North Korea for the past couple of years and maybe reached the conclusion that, boy, I'm really tired of talking to these people. We keep going in circles. But this obviously hasn't happened. Nikki Haley's held the job for like a whole month now, so like I said before, if you're not going to do your job, stop collecting a paycheck from the American people and resign. We also have a story involving, the whole region around North Korea, and that's China deploying anti-missile radar systems. These systems are meant to, I guess, disable the U.S. anti-missile missiles. Yeah, and this is kind of all a part of what's going on over there because the U.S. is deploying more of these systems that are meant to shoot down like North Korean ballistic missiles. However, North Korea is so close to China, these are also a threat to China. And so it's creating a situation where, yeah, maybe we're trying to combat North Korea, but we have to look at the broader implications of our actions there. We're putting ourselves in a position where we're also anchoring China, who is really the people that we could use to work out a deal with North Korea. So it kind of sad that we're creating a barrier there. All right, everybody, I think that's going to conclude my show for today. Another great week at Kyle's, at Foreign Policy Focus. We are 15 shows in now, so I'm pretty happy with that. I hope everybody's enjoying it. If you are liking the show, please share the show with your friends, family, whoever might be interested. Help the show to grow, recommend it to people. I'd be really appreciative if you did that. Check out our Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus. We have discussions in there about foreign policy news. It's pretty cool. Also, follow me on Twitter at KYAAALE. Like my Facebook page, Kyle's Files. And I will see everybody on Monday.